Good evening. My name is Bobby Remus, and I am a board member for the UCLA Lambda LGBTQ Alumni, and I would like to welcome you to the final session of the UCLA Lambda's Career Launchpad, To Be or Not to Be Out at Work. During these challenging times, COVID-19 has significantly impacted the economic landscape as millions of jobs were lost at the onset of the coronavirus pandemic. It is our hope that these webinars will help our UCLA Bruins and that you will find this Career Launchpad beneficial to career aspirations. With that said, I'm very pleased to introduce you to the former president of the UCLA Lambda LGBTQ Alumni Association, Kaya Foster.
Thank you so much, Bobby. And I have to say, Bobby and Fabian, who we'll say hi to in just a second, two of our fantastic board members, are really the ones who advocated for this programming and drove it forward. And it's really amazing to see it come to fruition in such a wonderful way and to get to share this programming with our community. And we are so grateful to Katie and Gloria and the whole team at UCLA Alumni Career Engagement. We could have tried to do it on our own. I'm glad we didn't have to. They were very gracious to come in with their time and their expertise and make this so successful. And we really hope that y'all got a lot out of it. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I just want to let you know that Lambda Alumni Association is one of the oldest and most established LGBTQ alumni networks in the entire country. We were founded in 1989, and we exist to support alumni, but also current students and the larger LGBTQ community. We host dozens of events throughout the year, everything ranging from professional, like tonight's events, to social. And we also support our students through raising money for LGBTQ specific scholarships. So some of our current students who are here, you are still eligible for those. We'd love to see you apply. We're here for you. So if there is some type of programming that you would like to see, you certainly don't need to be a board member. We'd love to have you get in contact with us, and we'll do what we can to make that event or programming happen for you. And speaking of programming, I would be remiss if I did not mention that we are participating in one of UCLA's most beloved traditions called Dinners for 12 Strangers. It is going virtual as everything else this year. And we are hosting 4 LGBTQ dinners, and they will be happening on February 20th, 21st, and 27th. So we're going to put some links for you in the chat. We would love to see you. And Fabian, not to put you on the spot, but I would love if you could just talk a little bit about the dinner that you're co-hosting.
Hello, everyone. I'm Fabian Primera. My pronouns are he, him. Thank you all so much for joining us. And I want to echo what Kaya said. Thank you so much to Bobby and to Kaya and to Katie and to everyone who has been on this journey with us to put this fantastic programming on. I am hosting a dinner for 12 focused on the Latinx LGBTQ section of our community. So if you or anybody that you know has lives in that intersectionality, we would love to have them at the dinner so we can talk about our experiences, any achievement that may have, and just have fun. So thank you so much. With that, I'll pass it back to Katie.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Fabian and Kaya and Bobby. And once again, like Kaya said, for those that are joining us for the first time tonight, I'd be remiss introducing myself. So my name is Katie Russo. I serve as Director of Alumni Career Engagement and Alumni Affairs. And very excited for you all to be joining us tonight for To Be or Not to Be Out at Work. We have a fantastic panel lined up. And if you are, anyone that are registered as of, I think, 6 o'clock tonight, you, of course, received the full panelist bios. So you have those you can reference. So I won't be reading their full bios, but just to let you know who's joining us tonight, we have Stephen Alves, who's an attorney at Alves Law Office. We have Peter Gandolfo, who is a graduate from the UCLA Anderson School of Management with his MBA from 2003. He is a certified executive coach for the Gandolfo Group. And then we have my colleague, Patricia Nguyen, who works as Senior Director of Diversity Programs and Initiatives in UCLA Alumni Affairs and oversees many of our fabulous diversity networks and groups, including the Lambda Alumni Association. And then we also are joined by Div Sharma, who is a UCLA graduate class of 2018, also has earned his master's, I think, in higher education. He's working as an academic coordinator and assistant to the Alston Burr Dean at Harvard University. So we have a really accomplished and fantastic panel joining us tonight that will be able to talk through some reflection points and considerations for to be or not to be out at work. So we will go ahead and get started with Patricia and Div.
Good evening, good morning, good day, wherever you're calling from the world. I just want to really thank you all for being here. It takes a lot to come to something like this, and I just want to first and foremost acknowledge that. It also takes a lot to show up for yourself. I feel like when we come from marginalized communities, often we are giving so much of others. So I just want to congratulate you all on showing up for yourselves today, because showing up for yourselves also means showing up for our community. So thank you there. Again, my name is Patricia Jiaowing, she, her, hers, calling from the native lands of the Cheyenne. And I am here, and we're going to mix this panel up a little bit. Div is actually going to be going with me at the same time. And we're going to sort of walk through a little bit some of the choices that you're sort of making when it comes to disclosure about your identity as LGBT in the workplace. So I'm going to share my screen. I am sad to have you all leave and then put this in front of your faces, but hopefully those will offer some context for visual learners. So we will start here. So basically, Div and I are going to share some maybe conceptually what you may know from the mind space, right? Like as you make this decision, it's of the mind and the heart. So we'll share you some slides that are more mind oriented, and then Div and I are actually going to share from the heart, our own personal experiences in terms of navigating our own professional journeys when it comes to coming out. I will say there is a caveat. Div and I, for those just are fine, we're both Virgos. But at the same time, we're also in very similar careers. So we want to make sure that folks know that our career choice has been part of our coming out process as well. And that may not resonate with everyone. Please use the chat. We will definitely want you to chime in. If it's just fun emoticons to say like, yes, I'm feeling this. This is what I'm about. Or like, wait, I don't know about that. This is a community space. This is here for you. And like everyone, we can all make mistakes, but we can all learn from them. So a couple things before we set this up. I just want to reiterate this because I know we're coming from so many different places that, you know, just set in the space a little bit. So I'm going to just go through some like statements so we can just maybe set the space a little bit and just bring our minds like here. Disclosure of one's identity is a very personal decision. This is really on you if you want to do this or not. I hope no one feels forced to ever disclose. So I just want to make sure that you all feel a sense of agency of oneself when it comes to disclosure. Secondly, we know we are fabulously multifaceted and intersectional in our identity, and I hope you treat your decision around disclosure the same. So choosing to disclose one's identity should be a holistic decision, right? This isn't one on the binary. This isn't one that is just like a black and white kind of decision. There are a lot of factors you should really take into account because we want to acknowledge the complexity of who we are. So I know we're talking about in the context of the workspace here, but this talks about your life, really, right? Your livelihood comes from work and all the things that are you. So I hope you choose to think about this decision in a very holistic way. Secondly, disclosure isn't a one-time thing, unfortunately. I think we all know this from our personal journeys as identifying as LGBT folks. You come out multiple times, and the workplace is not a place that is true in that place as well. So just know that this isn't just like a one-time decision, right? It may be a long-standing one that you may have to do over and over again. So a few things before we really get into the nuts and bolts of the mind thing, I just want you to maybe take a moment and reflect on these questions. Some factors that you really want to take into account. Where are you in your identity journey? You know, for some, you may be just starting to come out. Some you are wondering, you know, maybe I'm LGB, but maybe I'm a different part of that right now. And that is okay because we know our identity is a dynamic experience. So knowing where you sit in terms of identifying with the community is like a really, really important thing to understand before you actually make a choice to come out. You may be like, I embrace me in my full glory, right? So I am queer, out and proud. For other folks, you know, like I'm okay, like it's a part of my identity, but it's not the whole story and it's not the one I'm focusing on now. That's like a really important thing when you think about where your positionality is in coming out. This one is for real because of the current state we're in. Are you surviving? Are you thriving? By no means am I trying to undermine the fact that a job is a job right now, you know, and sometimes we may be in a place where the job prospect or looking for a career doesn't feel like you have full agency and power in the decision-making process, right? You're sort of feeling maybe perhaps you're at the whim because you're like, I need a roof over my head. I need money. I need to have stability. So you feel like you may have to be open to more compromising. Or are you thriving? You know, like I have more flexibility in terms of thinking about my finance and stuff like that. So really thinking about those factors as you think about disclosure. The other piece is, yes, it's a personal identity, but it's also social identity. And social identities are socially informed. So what perceptions are at play when you're thinking about disclosure? So for example, for myself, as someone that identifies as femme, a woman, I probably may not need to never disclose. No one may never think that I am queer. And that is something that I have to take into account. For others, that may not, their identity may be more visible or perceived more visible to other people. So that is definitely a factor to take into account. This fourth one, I hope you all think very carefully about this, because even though it's work, there's a lot of emotional energy that goes into being out, right? So how much emotional energy do you have in your current space and time and life that you are willing to perhaps have to explain what pansexuality means or would explain why you're using pronouns? How much of that do you really want to do? Because that's a choice as well. So that's something to think about. And then on the flip side, though, perhaps your identity actually offers you transferable skills in the workplace. I think for me and Div, this is truly the case. My LGBT identity translates to skills that I understand what it means to relate to those that may not feel like they're in power. It offers me a chance to understand what code switching is. I am flexible. I know how to deal with crisis situations because I've dealt with them in my personal life. So if you feel like those personal experiences have actually offered you transferable skills in your career, that's something to perhaps also think about in terms of disclosure. So those are some questions that I want you to mill on as we go through today's work together. And on that note, we're actually going to start talking about sort of different places in terms of where you could disclose. So I would be remiss if I did not give credit to our Canadian colleagues, University of Toronto. They made this amazing kind of guide that will be included in the Launchpad resources. We're actually going to dovetail into it. We're not going to read the slides because we want to color it in a bit more with our own experiences.
Right.
So disclosure looks like many things, and there are many times that you can disclose. So there are really three that we're going to look at right now. So one is before you land the job. I'm going to pass it to my colleague Div to maybe talk this through in terms of what disclosure looks like for him and things for you to consider.
Right. Thank you, Patricia. Hi, everyone. My name is Div. As Katie had let you know, just a little bit about me. I had been a UCLA Bruin, graduated in 2018, received my master's in 2019 in New York, and then I'm currently working at Harvard. At Harvard, I had two separate positions. So I'll talk a little bit about the first one I had, and then I'll talk a little bit about the second one I had and what I learned. So before you land the job, coming out of a master's program and looking for that job, you're kind of just like, hey, I'm new, I'm fresh. Someone should land me, right? You go through a lot of different interviews and you kind of find where you want to, where the person first accepts you and you're like, okay, cool, this is exciting, let's do it. The issue that had arose for me was being in an organization in which I didn't understand the complete community around it, right? What are the perceptions? Who is my boss? Who are the HR individuals, right? When you're just getting that job, when you're right out of your graduate school, right out of undergrad, you're kind of just like, hey, thank you. But you need to realize that your identity and your safety is something that is a propriety for yourself. So the thing that I had drawn from these slides is informational interviews. And what I'm going to implore you all on is making sure that when you are thinking of yourself as surviving in the workplace, look towards the other departments in your organization and get those informational interviews. When you're in an organization, the best thing to do is look for another job at times, right? Connect with different people, and maybe even thinking about how the world is right now on Zoom, you're able to connect with people through across borders. So what I had done in my first case scenario was not doing those informational interviews and being in a perceived location that didn't really support my identity. Thereafter, understanding that through reaching out, through understanding the ways that the different organizations work and the ways that they are collected, I was able to then, be much more free in the interview process and much more able to disclose not only myself, but also those transferable skills that come with being queer, right? And those were kind of the benefits and drawbacks, right? You can come into a space before you are landing the job, and you can really make sure that this is a space that you can feel safe in. This is a place that not only will protect that identity, but keep you safe, right? Throughout the work that you want to do. And you don't want to feel as though you're continually disclosing to people that don't hold that identity close and dear to them. And I think that Patricia and I, coming from the education space, we really do own and operate those transferable skills and want to put our identity and represent the people that we are holding in our community dearly. So some of the benefits are in the process is weeding out those homophobic, those transphobic, those employers that kind of rub you the wrong way. I want everyone to really lean into their intuition at this point. I mean, it's got us this far, right? Navigating through queerness in America or navigating through queerness in the world has got us this far with our intuition. So keep using it, keep using that gut instinct. It helps you practice your interviews. It helps you practice who you are, because when you're in the interview process, you want to brand yourself. You want to make sure that you know who you are and what you're bringing to the table. And those types of informational interviews will help you practice that. Some of the drawbacks to maybe saying that you're queer in the beginning, may be a focus on those experiences, right? They may be magnetizing those, and it may make you feel uncomfortable. There may be some unconscious and subconscious biases that you may feel in the interview process, or even with the people that you're interacting with. And those are things to kind of hone in on and take control of, because at the end of the day, this is your life, right? And you want to be able to feel comfortable in whatever shoes and whatever positions you are in. And as Patricia said, that it is up to you about what disclosure looks like. You do not have to, off the bat, say, hey, I'm queer, this is who I am. You can weave it into the texture of who you are. I know that one of the questions that were asked, and I think we'll talk about this later, was actually during an interview. And what I was able to do was I was able to talk about an award I had won and base it back into the queer community, and then also base it back into those transferable skills, right? Talking about policy, talking about organization, talking about what my passions for community are, but how they're based in my identity. And so it's understanding what your brand is while you're going through these motions. And while you're meeting these people, you can kind of feel it too.
Sorry, Div, I just jumped my mouth.
No, it's so good. That is my portion.
Yeah, I want to say too, and maybe add in my own experience too, disclosure looked like indicating certain organizations I was part of in my resume. I actually say it directly in my cover letter that my experience as a queer woman of color from an immigrant background is part of my strength, and explain why. It comes out in the questions that you can ask at interviews in terms of that. So those are some physical ways that it comes out in the job process in terms of where disclosure may happen. The next spot is when you accept the job, right? This isn't like, okay, you got your contract and you're like, hey, I'm gay. That's not what we're really talking about right here. It's really thinking about whether you had some fears about the company not being open to LGBT folks. And this is like a chance, again, right? In the acceptance, like almost a negotiation standpoint of whether you feel like, okay, now you know this part of me, are you okay with all of me? Because at this point, you still have a choice. You have a choice to take the job or not, right? So again, I want to just really uplift the agency piece during these parts of the process. So what this may look like, and this is what it looked like for me, when I sat down with the HR person, yes, I talked about compensation and benefits, but in that I would ask about same gender benefits for my partner. It would look like asking about employee resource groups. It would be looking at what is the general direction when it comes to diversity. I asked also very blatantly, what does the orientation for employees look like? Does it include in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion? So there are pieces around that in terms of what it can look like in my job. I did not personally do this way. I actually mostly do it in the first part. But again, I just want to acknowledge that not all industries are open to these kinds of things. And so this may be the best place for you when you assess your situation to come out. The drawback is that they may withdraw the offer. In my personal experience, if they're going to withdraw the offer at that point, this is probably not a good company to be working for your retention. You may be worrying that you're coming off as inconsistent or like you lied in that. That's not on you, I don't think. It's also about disclosure, right? Like you're not going to lie and say you're straight like in the interview, right? You can choose not to disclose. That's not lying, right? And then lastly, and this is what I mean in terms of the emotional energy, and I worried about this actually. I didn't come out for a bit in my job for the ones that I didn't come out initially, is how much energy do I want to use explaining why the photos on my desk include my trans partner. Why, I mean, like how much of that did I want to do? Would this be distracting to myself and my work? So those are places that, Div, I don't know if you have other things that you wanted to mention here from your personal experience.
Right, I think you touched on it, Patricia, with the conversation with HR. I think that was kind of the key point for me as well. It's a great time to speak about and ask questions about Title IX resources. It's a great time to ask about maybe even fairs or things that you could join, maybe even groups. I know that there's a group at Harvard that is based in queer individuals and queer professionals. And so there's things that are available. I think that there is the difference at times with maybe some different industries, business, finance, things that may not have those in ways that you can try and create. I think that there's this idea of creativity that we don't even have at times within organization, that maybe even asking that HR professional, like, how would I go about creating a professional group? It's not as if people in all these industries are all straight, right? So we can have that agency. We can feel as though just because it's a JOB, it doesn't mean that it's the end of the line. We can have that creativity and we can push through the types of changes that we want to see. Yes, that does take emotional labor, but at the same time, it's benefiting the community. So it's thinking about how we can really navigate the system and what really does accept us and what we can accept as well.
And the last time that disclosure can happen is when you are at your job, right? So what disclosure may look like at this point is that you mentioned that you do have a partner. Perhaps it shows in your office decor. You disclose it in a meeting because it relates to the topic. You know, you talk about, it's more in the work culture piece that I think it will come out in terms of that. Does JOB mean anything more than a job? No, not for my sake. No, David, you mentioned that. So thanks for that, Rebecca, because I know we're using some sort of like slang. But the things to think about is also safety, right? There's a great book that I will always recommend. It's by Kenji Yoshino called Covering. So it's not that like you're passing as straight or you're hiding, but maybe perhaps it's not something that you want to broadcast, right? So it's not like when someone asks you, oh, do you have a boyfriend, girlfriend? You're like, no, I have a girlfriend, but you don't make a big deal out of it, right? So there's like different ways that you can also exist in the workplace that will work for you. Again, it'll also depend on the relationships that you can draw, right? Allies are really important. And so that's something to also think about in terms of your work family, if you have one. Drawbacks, this is some real stuff, right? Does disclosure mean a differential treatment? Do you think people are gonna walk around eggshells around you? Do people now start thinking that they're gonna be offensive to you if they make certain things, remarks about the LGBT community? There may be also more work to do, right? To go back and think about your benefits. So there's that piece. I'm so sorry we can't pause for questions because we want to keep the night going, but feel free to ask questions in the chat and we'll be around at the end of the panel to also answer questions. Thanks all.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Patricia and Div. That was fantastic. So now we will transition. And once again, please feel free if there was questions that came up through their presentation, put them in the chat. We will do our best to get through them, and there will be time in breakout rooms where hopefully you can get some of those questions answered. But I will turn it over now to Peter.
Thank you, Katie. And thank you to Patricia and Div for getting the ball rolling. You certainly have me thinking about some benefits and considerations about disclosure. I'm going to start by just telling a little bit of my own personal story. Starting with when I first applied to business school at UCLA Anderson the first time, I chose not to disclose my sexual orientation. And this story I had in my head was, I want to get in on my own merit, which I kind of have to laugh to hear myself say that now. And I was put on the wait list, and the feedback was like, we're just trying to figure out, like, what do you have to offer to this community? And so the second time around, I worked on a lot of the other pieces of the feedback, improving my scores, demonstrating leadership, but I did choose to disclose my orientation. And where I arrived at was, that's part of what I had to offer the community. There, even for all of my straight classmates, they were going to be going out into jobs in the world where they were going to be interacting with people with all different orientations and backgrounds. And I had an opportunity to help them build awareness, and appreciation, and understanding. And that was a really big pivot for me, that even carried into the decision when I was ready to apply for internships. The question came up of, will I disclose on my resume? And thankfully, things have changed a lot since 2002 when that was happening. But I actually even got some advice within the UCLA community from the Career Center that said, you need to think really hard about this. And are you ready to be passed over for opportunities because of this? And where I netted out on that was, and just to kind of remind you of that period, this was after 9/11. Internships, job opportunities were scarce. And so there were a lot of reasons, like today, to think, well, I can't afford to be from my full self, because what if someone says no to that? And where I arrived was that, yes, there might be some people that don't want to consider me because of this, but I would rather know this at this stage in the process than to accept and receive and accept an offer and arrive there only to realize that it was not a place that would accept me for who I was. And what played out was, I ended up getting a job offer from Ford Motor Company. And that was actually one of the things that they brought up even when I arrived. And one thing that I experienced once I got into the role was that I was afforded access and opportunities that my non-LGBTQ interns, they didn't have access to. So at the time, Alan Gilmore was the CFO. He was the most out C-suite officer of any public company in the United States. And I was invited to have a 30-minute one-on-one conversation with him in his office. And those are experiences that really stand out in my memory, and they shaped my entire experience. And I ended up going back full time, and I was working across the cubicle from people that were spending an awful lot of energy using neutral pronouns to talk about their weekends, and being really vague with information, and doing a lot to scan for consistency. And I don't want to tell anybody to say that that's the wrong path and my path was the right. But what I did find is, while it did take energy at times to be out, I was using that energy to build connection, and they were using that energy to create space and distance. And while people didn't necessarily know that they were gay, they did have a sense that they were holding something back. And so think about what you want them to be able to say about how you contributed to the culture, how you were just your full self. And people, when you are disclosing that, people will see it and they will feel it. So enough of my story, and I want to think a little bit about some of the other questions that are on your mind. I want to be the first to acknowledge that disclosure, as Patricia acknowledged, it's a very personal thing. What works for one of us doesn't work for others. But if you're feeling leaning towards it, I think there's a lot of rewards to come from that process. Thankfully, as there was a nod to, the Supreme Court ruled in June of last year that we cannot be fired or discriminated against based on this. That doesn't mean it's not happening, but it's the potential is there. Just it'll be a little bit more covert. I'm trying to think if there's more to talk about on the resume piece. I do think one of the most powerful ways to do it is a nod to your involvement in leadership and volunteer work that is associated with it. And so it, we talked, there was a nod to code switching. It can often be a way that you can disclose it to those that are paying attention and those that don't know, for instance, that what the Human Rights Campaign does, they are not going to know. Another thing that I think about is even at the point of, if you're reaching out, if you're hearing from a headhunter, there are questions that you can even choose to ask that can be a signal of what the organization's culture is going to be like. So not every organization is going to have an employee resource group. Maybe your opportunity is to be the one that creates it. But you can ask questions like, what is the HRC rating, the Corporate Equality Index for this organization? And I've had times where they'd say, what is that? And while it wasn't an automatic no thank you, it did give me an awareness of like where they are on their journey, and let me think about how much energy do I have to be the educator, the change agent within that system. So I'm looking at the questions. Deciding whether to share your identity once you get into the workplace. I think the thing that, if you decide to disclose it, I think one way that it could really be a leverage point is finding ways of connecting with others. And it's not just the people that are LGBTQ, but you think about any person that's from a group that at times can feel targeted. That is something that you share in common. And it might be easy for someone to look at me as a white cisgendered man and say, like, I don't know what it's like to have a connection with a minority experience. This is a way that I can demonstrate that I do have a heightened awareness and I am willing to listen and connect. So I would look at it as not just who becomes your LGBTQ network, but who are now the people that you can build relationships and alliances with. And that's even inclusive of straight allies that don't share any other dimension of diversity. I'm thinking about what else. I would look at the ways that you can use this identity to help develop your career as well. For me, I realized that there was no employee resource group at Mattel, and a manager of mine connected me with the woman in charge of diversity inclusion. And that opened up access for me to connect with and meet with so many people that I would not have had access to meet with beforehand. And really ended up being a defining part of my career there at Mattel. So I think those are the main things for now, but if there are questions, I would be happy to talk a little further.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was fantastic. And yeah, once again, oh, go ahead.
And I won't chat about it, but I won't talk about it, but I'll put into chat some of the organizations that are not specific to an individual company that people might want to think about as well.
That would be perfect. Thank you. And like Peter mentioned, if there's questions that are lingering from what Peter shared, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll try to get through them or hold on to them for the breakout room time. But in order to make sure we are using our time effectively, I will transition to last but not least, our final panelist, attorney Stephen Alves.
All right, is my mute off? Can you hear me?
Yes, you're perfect.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, great. So anyway, thank you, Peter, for mentioning the Supreme Court ruling from last year. So what I wanted to focus on is the legal aspect of LGBT discrimination, and just a little bit about what I do. I'm an attorney and I represent employers. And so I defend employers in discrimination lawsuits, and so I want to kind of give that aspect of it, because a lot of times we talk about from the individual employee perspective. That's what we've heard a lot about tonight. But I want to talk about the benefits for the employer for having a diverse workforce. And why should an employer be more inclusive, and talk about some of those benefits. And then also I want to mention the legal ramifications for, as Peter said, just because it's illegal to discriminate doesn't mean it's not happening. And so I'll talk a little bit about what recourse might exist for those who have experienced discrimination because of discrimination. But before I get into that, I'll just share a little bit about my experience about coming out or not in workplaces. So the one thing that I want to mention, someone mentioned earlier that it's a continuation, it's a continuing process, it's an ongoing thing to come out. You don't just come out once at work. But you have to be very careful, because if you do come out once, that person that you've come out to can then spread it to the whole office instantaneously, as was the case in my first job. So I thought that I had trust in this one person. I could tell her there was very little risk of her, I thought, telling the whole office, but I mean, it turned out she was like the pipeline for gossip, and everyone knew immediately, which was fine with me actually, because I would have come out to anyone had they asked, but I wasn't prepared for that to happen just so quickly. And the result of it was that my supervisor at the time did not like dealing with homosexuals at all. And he started treating me very differently right off the bat. And it was pretty terrible working there for about a year. And then I left to work somewhere else. But by then I think that I had established myself in that industry. At the time I was working for an insurance company. I was adjusting claims. And because it was right around that same time, 2002, where I thought I was going to be in marketing and PR, and then 9/11 happened and all of the jobs were no longer available. And so I started applying everywhere, and I took the job which I thought was the best. When I was, when you're 22 years old coming out of college, you think the best means the highest paid. So I ended up as a claims adjuster. And so in those environments, when you come out, it's something that you have to, it's a personal decision you take, but just know that there are consequences if you share it with one, that you might as well share it with everyone. So going into the legal aspect of it, so for companies, the reasons that it's good to be inclusive is because if you are the recruiter for whatever organization you work for, if you're limiting yourself to just certain subsets of society, if you're excluding others, for example, you're limiting your talent base. And so by including LGBT, you're broadening your talent pool, and you can choose the actual best candidate with the best talents, the best skills for that job, and not excluding them just on the basis of their sexual orientation or their gender expression or their gender identity, or whatever basis that you might be excluding people on. And so another reason why employers should think about being more inclusive is because just allowing people to be themselves allows them to have less stress and therefore be more productive. Because if they're constantly having to worry about, code switching, or if they're having to worry about using a certain pronoun, or, say, trying to keep everything very gender neutral, my partner, or, my other half, or different ways that you have to say those things to avoid, saying he, God forbid. Those things are, it's just so much better for your employees to be more productive and not have to worry about that little aspect of it. And they can just focus more of their energy on their jobs. It just makes such good business sense to do that. There have been studies, there's a McKinsey study, and I can put links to these in the chat. There was a McKinsey study that said that, in fact, let me see if I can put that link up quickly. They said that basically the top quartile for racial and ethnic diverse companies were 35% more likely to have financial returns than otherwise companies that were not diverse nationwide. They were also 15% more likely to have financial returns above the respective industry medians. And so that was a McKinsey study from 2015. There was also, let's see. So there's a study that came out in 2020 that said that the US economy could save $9 billion annually if organizations were more effective at implementing diversity, just by saving on costs defending against discrimination suits. So if there's no other reason to not discriminate, it's just that you're going to save $9 billion as a country in defending against those types of lawsuits. I mean, that's a huge amount of money that goes into that. So looking at it from that perspective as an employer, it actually pays to do what's right and not discriminate. So you don't have to waste all this money fighting these lawsuits. And so then getting back to what Peter was saying, in California, we have benefited from having certain legal protections that nationally were not available to us until last year. And ironically, it was a Trump-appointed justice who spoke for the majority in that case. It was a 6-3 ruling. And what they did is they defined the word sex to mean that the word sex is inclusive of sexual orientation and gender identity. And so discriminating on those grounds is illegal because it ties into the Civil Rights Act from 1964. But before last year's Supreme Court ruling in California, it's also kind of ironic that there was Republican Pete Wilson who signed in 1992 the Fair Employment and Housing Act that we have that specifically provides LGBT employees with protection from discrimination and harassment in the workplace. And so if you have been the victim of LGBT discrimination in the workplace, you do have rights and you should seek representation, and you can get your attorney's fees, you could get back pay, you can have your out-of-pocket expenses covered for the lawsuit, you could get future lost earnings, you can have reinstatement if you want it. You can also have punitive damages depending on the case. You can also get reasonable accommodations or training. There's a number of ways that the courts can help in this situation. What happens, I think, most often is that people will get themselves into a niche or a certain industry, and they'll think like, oh, this industry is so small and I don't want to make waves. I don't want to sue to protect myself. And I should just keep my mouth shut and get another job and just move on. I don't want to, tarnish, scorch the earth and burn bridges by suing to protect my rights. And that's a choice that everyone has to make. And it's a choice that I made once when I worked for a law firm when I first started practicing law. And looking back, I wish I wouldn't have made that choice. There were other people who I had known who had sued that law firm for other things that were unrelated to sexual orientation. And I remember that there was talk about those people in the industry. And I because of that, I was very conscious about that. And so when I was discriminated against, I decided I didn't want to I didn't want my name to be out there in the small industry that I'm in and have it be known that I was suing based on discrimination. And but looking back, I really regret that decision. I wish I would have, because I don't think it would have changed anything for anyone to know that I was protecting for myself or standing up for my rights. And I could have had, I went through a really tough time while I was looking for another job because I didn't protect myself and stand up for what my rights were. Ultimately, it turned out to be okay, but there was a really rough patch in my life where I had made the choice not to file a lawsuit against my employer. And I could have had either back pay, I could have had reinstatement, I could have, whatever the case may have been, however that could have turned out. But instead I got nothing because I chose not to pursue anything. So I just had to deal with what I had until I found another position. Now, fortunately, I'm self-employed, so it's the best of both worlds. I obviously accept myself, and my homosexuality is not a problem in my workplace for me or any of my employees. And it's also interesting that all of my employees are heterosexual. So, and that's fine. So anyway, I just want everyone to know, like, the takeaway from this should be that it is illegal to be discriminated against, both federally and under the state law of California. You certainly have rights if you are discriminated against. And what does discrimination look like? Discrimination could be subtle, it could be very blatant. It depends. It's not always something that's going to be, stated so clearly. Like, they might not tell you, I'm not hiring you because you're gay, but sometimes when you get the sense that's the case, it probably is, and it's worth looking into. Other times, where you could be at a job and ask a supervisor for help, like I did once, and have him say, grab your balls, be a man, make a decision. And so I go back to the phone and say, okay, that treatment's authorized. It's just a very different situation because everybody's case is different. That's the one thing about employment law that I really like, is that it's very fact driven. Cases are won and lost based on the facts of their cases. And so as an employer or as an individual, the number one thing you can do to protect yourself is to document everything. Anything that happens to you or to one of your employees, document everything, because those facts are going to be what wins and loses those cases. Even if it's just sending yourself a text message or sending an email to yourself so that something is time-stamped about what has been said or what happened or how you felt under a certain scenario, keeping that documentation log is going to be essential. But for the employers, I think that documenting the same types of interactions with your employees is important to protect yourself. But also, my focus, what I'd rather focus on is just the benefits for being more inclusive, which again, you're broadening your talent pool, you're lowering the stress of your employees, you're boosting your productivity by default when you do that, and that's backed by that McKinsey study that I still need to post. Sorry about, I forgot that.
No worries. And you'll have time.
Actually, I have something I would like to share that it came up in my discussion in the breakout room.
Sure.
And there was something that I think I should have mentioned in the first time. The question was, if you are feeling uncomfortable about something that's happened in the workplace, or you think that you might be discriminated against, like, what should you do? What's the procedure? What are the steps? And the number one thing that I wanted to stress is that, and this is coming from the perspective of I defend employers for a living. And so I can tell you that as from the individual standpoint, the number one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to go to HR. HR is not there for you. That's not their purpose, regardless of what they say or what the materials are. HR is there to defend the company. So if it comes to a point where you think that you should go to HR, instead you should be seeking representation from an attorney and let them handle that aspect of it. I do think that, if you do feel uncomfortable, the number one thing to do would be to address it with the person that you are experiencing with, if you feel safe doing so. And then document everything that happens up until that point. And the last thing I'll say, and I'll let other people speak too, because I don't want to monopolize the time, but harassment and discrimination is seen based on a sliding scale. And so the more outrageous something is that happens, the less of a requirement that it has to be something that repeats. On the other hand, if there's something that's really small and minor and shouldn't really bother you, but it happens every single day, that's going to become harassment. And so the courts look at that sliding scale and they say, like, how persistent has this pattern been and how outrageous is this conduct? And so as you're documenting, if you have all of that stuff on your side, then that's how you're going to win your case and establish that there is in fact harassment or discrimination going on. And so that's my thing.
Thank you, Stephen. That's fantastic advice and great point.
Katie, I'd like to do a tiny message. Thank you to everyone. Referencing one of our previous launch pads, many of us are on LinkedIn. We are your connections. We are your allies. We want to see you succeed. So feel free to reach out and connect. I'm sure people would love to help you further.
I just want to dovetail on this note. You don't have to make this decision alone. There is a whole crew right here ready to help you and talk it out if you'd like. We are here. I wish I had something like this when I was making the decision, and actually did. Actually, the ED of the HRC was a mentor of mine and helped me talk through, and I'm so grateful for that conversation and still remember it. The other thing I want to say that I wish I had told myself back then, if you don't disclose, you are not letting your community down. Okay, like for me, it was like, I don't know of any other queer Asian women that are out. I need to be out. This is the right thing to do for my community. It's okay. It's your decision. The community will be here and back you because you're being you, and that's the most powerful thing for all of us. So give your allowance. Don't put that community pressure on you because we will be here.
I have one tiny question, and really, so it kind of references something that Peter said about, and this has gone many times. What comes to mind is, for some of us, our light shines a little brighter than others, and I want to be sensitive of time. So, but you know, there's a concept of executive presence, and sometimes executive presence has tended to mean white, cisgendered, no accent, a certain stereotype, doesn't talk with Liz or so forth. And so where's where am I going with this? I guess the question is, you know, we want to be authentic, and when we're authentic, we allow people to really care about us and love ourselves. So how any advice on mitigating for those of us who we can't, or it's very hard to hide the beautiful light that we shine?
I'm happy to share my perspective, but I welcome others weighing in. I spent a lot of my time trying to follow or imitate the people that were really good at X, Y, and Z. And all I ended up being was a really bad facsimile of them. The faster that you can figure out what your strengths are, and when it comes to leadership presence, figure out what does leadership presence look like for you, it's going to come through in an authentic way. For me, I was never going to be the person that was the A+ presenter, but I was the one that built deep connections with the people that I did business with. And that more than made up for any misgivings I had on my presentation skills. So find what is your superpower and lean into that piece of it.
Yeah, if I may add something to that as well. I worked for a company called Chubb Insurance for a time, and they were amazing with their inclusivity and what have you. And I remember even being a gay employee, there was the VP of underwriting was very flamboyant and was very far out there, and in terms of shining his bright light, and he shined his light, believe me. And even as a gay person, I saw him and I thought, isn't that a little too much for the workplace? Like, I had my own biases that have been ingrained in me that I didn't even realize that I had these issues. And then what I realized through working there was by observing it, was that in his example, for example, is that his executive presence was never questioned because of the results that he delivered consistently. And he was very well respected for everything that he had accomplished professionally, irrespective of how he may dress or speak or what inflections he had in his voice. Like, his record spoke for itself, and he was in a place that allowed that to happen. So just be yourself, like what Peter said. I would agree with that.
It's just exhausting. I feel like trying to cover for me personally, it's just too tiring to keep up with, like, what did I tell this person versus this person. And I think for me, it was just more of an energy decision of, like, this takes less energy for me to do this, so I can divert it into leading, into creating, into innovation. And so it was more of an energy decision for me of where did I want to divert it to, and what would be most useful for me in the long run. Now, did I get sick and tired of people trying to set me up with the other lesbian in the office, or dealing with what does pansexuality mean? So in some ways, disclosure does change too. So I disclose myself as queer, so I don't have to explain what pansexual is. So there are also different ways that disclosure plays out there. And so for me, it's just like a lot of, like, thinking about where I want to spend my energy. And I love what Peter said about building connections, because it actually did offer me a lot of connections, being myself.
Yeah, and just to add to what Patricia had said, I think we talked about it a little bit about disclosure. For me, when I walk into a room, everyone pretty much can guess I don't have a girlfriend, right? So what does it look like for me to kind of saying, like, oh, this is what I'm about, this is what I'm passionate about, this is the flamboyancy. And going back to what Stephen said, it is about results. Like, I can walk in with rainbow heels, no one gives a because I'm out here making sure that those Excel spreadsheets are fire, okay? So it's really about making sure that you know who you are, and you know how to present who you are, and you know how to brand who you are, because all those things are very important, and all those things bring out a much better version of yourself. I will tell you, okay, I have been a lot of things, but understanding who I am in the workplace is one of the things that have brought me such joy, has brought me such peace, really, in understanding I can be a professional person, but I can also be myself. And what does that look like? It looks like a very vibrant, a very welcoming, a very warm atmosphere for the people that interact with me. And I think that's the point, right? We want to be thriving in our workplace. We don't want to be surviving.
Just lots of love for y'all in the chat. Hopefully a second to read it before the room closes. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. This has been really incredible. And everyone, there will be a recording just of the speakers that you will have access to, and lots of resources. So be sure to check for Katie's email.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. And I know some people shared their LinkedIns and emails in the chat, so that will be, feel free to connect with those. I know people can then share contact information if they want to from here, but thank you so much for everyone coming tonight and our panelists. Just cannot thank you enough for taking time. Full Zoom applause, full real applause in every form and fashion. But honestly, just the advice and perspectives, and I think also your personal stories meant so much to those that were here tonight. So thank you for everything you shared and your support that you offered this community tonight. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care, stay well. We're here for you.